So good morning. Welcome to the Humanist community in Silicon Valley's Sunday Forum. My name is Matt Courtney. I'm a recorder and a member of the board of the Humanist community. The Humanist community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a reality-based philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. We value freedom, health, happiness, fairness, compassion, and using science and reason to acquire and apply knowledge. If these words describe your thinking, we invite you to become a member of the Humanist community if you've not already done so. Membership forms are available on our website at humanists.org. That's humanists plural. Today's forum is Winning Women's Suffrage, Celebrating Victories, Learning from Mistakes, an illustrated talk commemorating the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage in the United States. And it'll be presented by Professor Nancy C. Unger, Professor of History at Santa Clara University.
So, I am always happy to be back with the Humanist community, and I thank all of you for being here today. And I especially want to thank Brian Davis, who has really been helping me get organized for this and understand how it's going to work. So, when I wrote this biography of Belle LaFollette in 2016, I had a hard time reconciling what I so admired about her with what I found to be a frustrating blind spot concerning her approach to promoting women's suffrage. And these two articles that I published last fall were an effort to wrestle with that blind spot and its legacy. And she was one of this nation's more enlightened suffrage campaigners. I want to put her in the context of the larger, sometimes inspiring and sometimes horrifying suffrage movement. I think it's important that we celebrate that movement's victories and learn from its mistakes. So first, a bit about Belle LaFollette. I've spoken to this group about her before, but just in case you didn't memorize every word, here's a little refresher for you. She was a journalist and a very popular speaker, married to progressive Wisconsin Senator Robert LaFollette, who just happens to be the subject of my first book. And she was the first woman to graduate from the University of Wisconsin Law School. See if you can pick her out in this photograph. As one of my friends points out, she appears to be the only member of her class to have earned a diploma. So she testified in 1913 before the U.S. Senate Committee on Women's Suffrage. Now, she had long argued that women merited the vote based on their service as public housekeepers. According to LaFollette, quote, one fundamental reason for equal suffrage is that it will arouse homemakers of today to a realization that they can only do the part their mothers and grandmothers did for the home when they used the ballot to secure these standards of cleanliness and healthfulness for the municipal home, which were established in earlier times for the isolated home. LaFollette was hardly alone in downplaying or just eschewing entirely the feminist argument of true equality in favor of a generally more palatable, less radical domestic rationale. As the first signs urges here, women need votes to get stricter, pure food laws. And here, a women's vote purifies this dirty boy. LaFollette and other suffrage leaders urged that women receive the vote not as a rejection of the prevailing construction of womanhood, but as women's logical fulfillment as the naturally more moral sex, generally superior to men in their selflessness and dedication to the greater good. That is, women deserve the vote because of their sex, not in spite of it. As you can see, they want the vote to stop the white slave traffic, stop sweatshop labor, save the children. According to this view, a woman's role as homemaker and mother were her greatest political credentials. The woman's vote is presented as the only way to legislate pure food and milk and enforce prostitution and child labor. La Follette agreed, declaring politics is merely public housekeeping. Clara Burdett, a leading light in the women's club movement, also agreed, describing the new role for women in urban industrial society. The woman's place is in the home. But today, would she serve the home? She must go beyond the home. No longer is the home encompassed by four walls. Many of its important activities lie now involved in the bigger family of the city and the state. Journalist Retta Chatdor called community home, city dwellers the family, and public schools the nursery, adding, and badly do the home and the family and the nursery need their mother. So these adorable babies are carrying a Votes for Our Mothers banner that emphasize it's their food, health, play, home, schools, and work that are all regulated by men's votes. Think it over and give mother the vote. In the words of a Denver member of the General Federation of Women's Clubs, Uncle Sam has been conducting his house on bachelor principles. You can see the results on the left, the dark city filled with saloons, cheap taverns, red light dives, etc. But the woman's vote brings public playgrounds, libraries, schools into the sunlight. Belle La Follette repeatedly argued that in modern times, women's suffrage was in no way a rejection of women's essential role as wife and mother. Significantly, she also had long simultaneously maintained the more feminist assertion that men and women are equally and mutually concerned in government, and it is only when they are equally understand and are responsible that we shall secure a well-balanced democracy. In her address to the Senate committee, La Follette testified, "Home, society, and government are best when men and women keep together intellectually and spiritually, where they have the widest range of common interests, and where they share with each other the solutions to their common problems." She called women's suffrage a simple matter of common sense before concluding, "You know how Lincoln defined government at Gettysburg. Ours is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And are not women people?" These were the arguments promoted by some of the best known of the suffrage advocates. Susan B. Anthony, "The true republic, men, their rights and nothing more. Women, their rights and nothing less." Elizabeth Cady Stanton, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." And Carrie Chapman Catt, "The vote is the emblem of your equality, women of America, the guarantee of your liberty." It was this combination of arguments, women pay taxes, along with women clean the homes, help them clean the city, that created an inclusive and big tent for a diverse group of supporters of women's suffrage in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. People who believed that women were inherently maternal and more moral than men found one set of arguments compelling, while feminists who rejected all claims of women's moral superiority reacted favorably to the other set. Woman's cause is man's, it says here. They rise or fall together. So for all its wide appeal, however, this uneasy, often mutually exclusive combination also hindered their rights activism for decades to come. And there were more immediate conflicts as well. Many people opposed votes for women because they believed it would distract them from the domestic world of home, husband, and children that should be every woman's sole concern. Here, Mrs. Jones bolts from the ballot box because she's remembered that she's left a cake in the oven. Moreover, suffrage opponents believed that the natural forces that rendered women so well suited to domestic tasks left them ill-suited for the complex hurly-burly of politics, a world that encompassed economics, business, and other subjects too sophisticated for the emotional and sentimental female mind, which you can see here is filled entirely with domestic matters. This poster claims that it is not the mothers of America who are agitating for the vote. They know it would damage the family. Instead, as California State Senator J.B. Sanford argued in 1911, let woman be content with her lot and perform those high duties intended for her by the great Creator, and she will accomplish far more in governmental affairs than she can ever accomplish by mixing up in the dirty pool of politics. Since women were deemed too pure, too good to vote, it was a duty left best to men. The anti-suffrage campaign was supported by many women as well as men, and it received tremendous financial backing from the industry that believed it had the most to lose if women, the gender of moral uplift, ever gained political power, the liquor industry. Women, including the members of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, had played the gender card for years in their efforts to pressure male voters to save the nation from the evils of alcohol. Shall the mothers and children be sacrificed to the financial greed of the liquor traffic? Here's a more empowering view of their crusade. The anti-suffrage forces fought back with a variety of tactics. Some emphasized the ruin of the home, the hardworking husband coming home to his neglected children. Here you can see the stark choice. Does the woman belong in the home on the left with his happy baby, or on the street corner, which clearly renders her ugly and possibly crazed? Others were still more demeaning, such as this one, featuring the origins and development of the suffragette. At 15, a little pet. At 20, a little coquette. At 40, not married yet. At 50, a suffragette. And of course, there's always the good old women becoming hysterical at the sight of a mouse. Another popular trope was the reversal of masculinity and femininity that would surely destroy the family and the nation. Note in these images the poor, suffering children, the emasculated husbands, and the often ugly masculine wives. So here we can see what happens when women vote. When women vote, not only do wives smoke cigars, drink, and read the sports page, and husbands darn their wives' stockings, but husbands are to provide themselves with new trousers out of their wives' old skirts. On election day, women leave their crying children with their emasculated husbands. Here, you can see the wife wearing trousers and the husband who sunk so low he has bows in his hair as he cooks dinner in their very unhappy home. Women have taken over this bar where they freely smoke and drink. And here, a husband laments, "My wife's joined the suffrage movement. I've suffered ever since." Other predictions included economic devastation in the form of higher taxes, general ruin to employment and business, and even total political disaster. I assume you do realize that women's suffrage and socialism do go hand in hand. Well, despite all of these dire predictions, the women's vote was gaining traction in the Western states, where the predominantly male population was eager to attract women. And in those Western states, including California in 1911, none of these dire predictions made by the antis were realized. The home did not fall. Husbands were not emasculated. Mothers did not abandon their children to smoke cigars in saloons. But ultimately, the state-by-state campaign was deemed too slow, and efforts increasingly unified behind the campaign for a constitutional amendment, which meant that they needed the support of Congress. Oh, I forgot to show you, this is the California campaign. All right, here we go. Inspired by the more militant suffragettes in England, Alice Paul and her comrades began to picket the White House and the Capitol every day, an action that lasted more than 2 years. While legal, picketing previously had been carried out largely by labor organizations and was considered pretty radical. Originally appalled by such unladylike and strident tactics, Bella Follett went to the Capitol nearly every day to observe the Senate. And she saw demonstrations like this one, in which each woman wears a sash bearing the name of the college or university where she earned her degree. According to La Follett, Alice Paul and her associates stood, quote, like sentinels at their posts, silent and unobtrusive, letting their signs and banners speak for them. More and more, I grew to admire the courage, the strength of purpose, and devotion to principle which sustained the picketers in their hard undertaking. Her conviction grew that they were pursuing a consistent and effective policy. Other suffrage activists were exasperated. They believed the picketers' insulting messages were alienating members of Congress who had slowly been coming around to the suffrage side. Political insider Helen Hamilton Gardner, who had the ear of President Wilson, continually offered reassurances that these undignified, strident picketers did not represent the majority of women who sought the vote. But an even larger obstacle blocked the path to the 19th Amendment, the Southern Wall of Opposition. White Southerners had long promoted fears of the potential enfranchisement of African American women and the overall growth of the African American electorate. And these are some ugly images that I'm about to show. So this is how they would try to panic white people. Here, the Negro is stepping on the white man. And here's a warning against Negro rule from an honest white man, in quotation marks, holding the ballot. Get back. We will not stand it. The white South had successfully implemented a variety of ways to prevent African American men from voting and feared that the 19th Amendment would bring increased scrutiny. So the third bullet point here about why you should vote against women's suffrage states their case plainly. Vote against women's suffrage because universal suffrage wipes out the disenfranchisement of the Negro by state law. And the final bullet point, white supremacy must be maintained. Revered suffrage leader Susan B. Anthony made it clear way back in 1866 that white women deserved the vote far more than did African American men, let alone African American women. White women were better, she said then, quote, the Negro men just emerged from slavery, who were not only totally illiterate, but also densely ignorant of every public question. And in 1869, Elizabeth Cady Stanton urged, support the women's vote if you do not wish the lower orders of Chinese, Africans, Germans, and Irish, with their low ideals of womanhood, to make laws for you and your daughters. Yet on the floor of the House of Representatives, John Moon of Tennessee argued that in the southern states, where blacks outnumbered whites, women's suffrage would, quote, produce a condition that would be absolutely intolerable. We owe something to our sister states struggling to maintain law and order and white supremacy. And Louisiana Senator Edward Gay bitterly declared, 13 states will never vote for this measure unless you amend it to spare the South the problem of the Negro woman vote. And yet, When Mississippi Senator John Sharp Williams tells Jeannette Rankin, the first woman elected to Congress, if we passed your amendment, then Negro women could vote, she does not respond with a vigorous defense of the rights and equality of her Black sisters, asking instead, but couldn't you keep them from voting the same way you keep the Negro men from voting? And she too reassures her fellow members of the House in 1918, quote, there are more white women of voting age in the South today than there are Negro men and women together. The African American women and men who had been working diligently on behalf of women's suffrage were unceremoniously thrown under the bus by their white sisters. Some white suffrage leaders claimed this a necessary evil in the name of expediency. Challenging the entrenched racism of the South would only guarantee that no women would get the vote. Others used sort of deference to Southern racism as a convenient cover for their own. The day before Woodrow Wilson's presidential inauguration in 1913, the National American Women's Suffrage Association held a massive parade, planned chiefly by Alice Paul. Chicago's Ida B. Wells, lynching opponent, civil rights activist, and one of the best known and most respected African American women of the time, was told that the leadership, quote, wanted to keep the delegation entirely white, close quote, and that all African American suffragists were to walk at the end of the parade in a colored delegation. Wells responded, if the Illinois women do not take a stand now in this great Democratic parade, then the colored women are lost. I shall not march at all unless I can march under the Illinois banner. During the parade, she simply joined the Illinois delegation. This effort to segregate the parade was just the tip of the iceberg. Both major suffrage organizations published state-by-state population counts showing that enfranchising Southern women would actually increase the white vote because white women outnumbered Black women in most Southern states. Carrie, Chapman, Catt offered this unequivocal reassurance. White supremacy will be strengthened, not weakened, by women's suffrage. Now, it's always dangerous to judge the past by present-day standards. But Belle LaFollette, in the thick of this fight, refused to accept that the only way for women to win the vote was to curry favor with the racists in Congress, denying the rights of African Americans. And she skewered the hypocrisy of her sister racists. It seems strange, she observed caustically, that the very ones who consider it a hardship to sit next to a colored person in a streetcar entrust their children to colored servants and eat food prepared by colored hands. She denounced specifically the new segregation being imposed in Washington, D.C. by the Wilson administration. Racial equality in all things, she asserted, quote, is in no way a matter of social privilege. It is a matter of civil right. Merit, not sympathy, demands that Negroes should not be discriminated against and should be accorded the justice due them as citizens of a democracy. One reader termed Belle LaFollette disgraceful to the white race and suggested that the only true reason for her views was that she herself was Black, but only a little light in color. It was signed, a real white person with no black stripes down the back like you. In 1914, African-American activist Nannie Helen Burroughs called LaFollette the successor of Harriet Beecher Stowe, and lawyer James H. Hayes, speaking for his race, told LaFollette, we thank God for such a woman as you. We thank God for sending you to us, and we thank you for coming. A few more like you would awaken the sleeping conscience of the nation. And God knows she tried, urging in particular the wives of congressmen to consider how, quote, an absence of purpose that characterizes the social life of the national capital reacts unfavorably on the country. and asserting that privileged wives were not supposed to belong to what she called the butterfly and parasitic class, but should represent the earnest, intelligent womanhood of the nation. She had few takers in her call to fight for black rights to be as vigorously defended as white rights, and the southern wall of opposition in Congress remained firmly opposed to women's suffrage. When the United States entered World War I, controversy over women's suffrage increased. The banners of the suffrage picketers asked Wilson why he was so concerned about preserving democracy abroad when he was opposing it at home. Those opposed to suffrage were outraged by this criticism of a sitting president during wartime. On June 25, 1917, 12 White House picketers were arrested for obstructing traffic and were convicted and jailed. The jailing of white ladies incensed many members of the public, and their outrage increased when Alice Paul, arrested on October 27th, began a hunger strike and was repeatedly force-fed. When the press revealed that hostile prison guards savagely beat other women imprisoned for picketing, the public was further scandalized. By the end of November, all the protesters had been released. La Follette valued the changes brought by Paul's more aggressive tactics. Prior to Paul's arrival, she said, the capital city of the United States was enjoying a veritable Rip Van Winkle sleep on the subject of suffrage, unlike the respectful, orderly tactics employed by La Follette and many others. Paul and her followers, noted and now admiring La Follette, quote, wanted the vote, and they wanted to get it by the shortest cut. The transformation in sentiment that has taken place on the suffrage issue at the Capitol has been spectacular and extraordinary. If it had not been part of my observation and experience, I would not have believed so radical a change possible. And in my judgment, this wonderful result is mostly due to the brains, the energy, the martyr-like zeal and spirit that is back of the organization that has kept the picketers at the Capitol and the White House. Seeking to press their advantage, La Follette urged, now is the time for intensive work, concentrated effort, persistent drive. Senators and representatives here should be made to feel all the pressure that can be brought to bear on them from home. Many suffrage advocates presented women as dutiful and devoted, patriotic citizens carrying out vital civic responsibilities during wartime. Because women were understood to be naturally moral and selfless, their support for the war through a variety of home front volunteer activities, including the American Red Cross, validated President Wilson's claims that the nation's war aims, including making the world safe for democracy, were entirely noble and altruistic. Eager for women's endorsement and their volunteer labor, on January 9th, 1918, President Wilson announced his support for the women's suffrage amendment as a war measure. When the Senate still refused to pass the amendment, arrests resumed of the silent sentinels, who continued to picket the White House. Spanner says, we shall fight for things which we have always carried nearest our hearts, for democracy, for the right of those who submit to authority to have a voice in their government. A quote from Woodrow Wilson's war message. Women protesters dismissed Wilson's pledge of support for suffrage as hollow, publicly burning his words in late 1918. In early February of 1919, the president himself was burned in effigy. The protests continued. And perhaps more importantly, so did the efforts by political insider Helen Hamilton Gardner to lobby aggressively inside the halls of Congress, reassuring members of the Southern wall of opposition that women's suffrage did not threaten white supremacy, but would reinforce it. On May 21st, 1919, the House passed the measure 304-89. 2 weeks later, the Senate passed the 19th Amendment, squeaking it by with just 2 votes over the necessary 2/3 majority. off it went to the state legislatures for ratification, where it bogged down, not surprisingly, in the South. But only temporarily. On August 18, 1920, the Tennessee legislature, by a vote of 49 to 48, put the amendment over the top. So, women have the vote. And I think we can pause for a moment to really take in what a transformative achievement this is. A woman's vote is equal to a man's. And here is the new hope. The woman's sphere is now in the home, the law, industry, businesses, the arts, wherever she makes good. It's also worth thinking about how the vote was achieved and at what cost. Certainly, the calculated decision not to insist on colorblind inclusion was devastating to the nation overall, but especially to the African American women who continued to fight to vote, and to the reputations of the white women who chose to exclude their Black sisters, and the long legacy of disappointment and resentment that precedent of exclusion established. There were other repercussions as well. Having the vote is not the same as being equal or having equal rights. And arguing that women deserve the vote because of their motherhood and innate feminine qualities sure didn't help, and it had many repercussions. So way back in 1908, we have a landmark Supreme Court case, Muller versus Oregon, had already revealed the dangers of gains that had been won for women laundry workers on the basis of their differences from men. The posed question was whether women's liberty to negotiate a contract with an employer should be equal to a man's. The court asserted plainly that women were not equal to men, but dependent and inferior. Men were possessed of a self-reliance, said the court, that enabled them to assert full rights. However, according to the Supreme Court, that women's physical structure and performance of maternal functions place her at a disadvantage in the struggle for subsistence is obvious. History discloses that woman has always been dependent upon man. As minors, though not to the same extent, she has been looked upon in the courts as needing a special care that her rights may be preserved. She is not an equal competitor with her brother. Differentiated by these matters from the other sex, she is properly placed in a class by herself. It is impossible to close one's eyes to the fact that she still looks to her brother and depends upon him. And yet La Follette scoffed at concerns about conceding women's inferiority to gain protective legislation. She steadfastly refused to conflate protection with privilege or different with inferior. She believed that one could remedy problems that plagued women specifically without conceding their inequality. She faced, however, a growing consensus that women could have equal rights or protective legislation, but not both. In La Follette's Big Tent, women who were confident that it was their maternal feminine nature that qualified them to vote pursued very different agendas than women who believed in women's political, economic, and social equality with men. La Follette had triumphantly reported that, as promised, equal suffrage was helping to bring equal pay for equal work. However, over the course of the next 100 years, many women were protected right out of their jobs by legislation and labor practices designed to shield women. For example, even as messages such as the now iconic, "We can do it," Rosie the Riveter poster sponsored by Westinghouse, urged women to take on factory jobs to support the war effort during World War II. The Bureau of Labor Standards of the U.S. Department of Labor recommended a maximum lifting weight of 50 pounds for men and 25 pounds for women. For the next 25 years, this arbitrary limit based on sex, no matter an individual's strength or ability, contributed to ads like this one. You mean a woman can do it? Can open a bottle of ketchup? And disqualified women from a variety of factory jobs, relegating them to lower paying, non-union work. It also disqualified women from many government positions as well, like postal carrier. Using some of the essentialist arguments proffered by suffrage campaigners, including La Follette, many educational opportunities and professions remained essentially closed to women. In Hoyt v. Florida, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously in 1961 that women, the center of home and family, were not required to serve on juries. Their exclusion from this obligation of citizenship, according to the court, also protected women from the filth, obscenity, and obnoxious atmosphere of the courtroom. Yale and Princeton did not accept female students until 1969. Until the Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974, banks could refuse to issue a credit card to an unmarried woman and could require that a married woman's husband co-sign. Here, a credit card company tells a husband down at the bottom, we want you to have what you want, which includes his wife not being able to use his card. Only the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978 ended the practice of firing women when they became pregnant. Marital rape was not recognized until the 1970s and not criminalized in all states until 1993. Equal pay for equal work has yet to be achieved. Stereotypes about women's natural role as support staff took a variety of very long-lasting forms. Even in the late 1950s, 78% of college faculty, 95% of physicians, 97% of lawyers, senators, members of the House, and ambassadors were men. By 1963, 38% of college students were women. So yes, women had more access to higher education, but the majority of their degrees remained in the helping professions, teaching, nursing, social work, and home economics. The options for African American women were even more limited, and the solution offered by Madison Avenue, bleach their skin to appear whiter. In the book, in the 1947 bestseller, Modern Woman, The Lost Sex, two experts, one a woman, detailed the long list of tragedies certain to befall women who voluntarily, that is, not out of financial necessity, attempted to combine paid work with raising a family, including the loss of femininity, neglected children, resentful husbands, sexual frustration, discontent, and ultimately divorce and supreme unhappiness. Women forced to work outside the home by financial necessity frequently suffered from guilt, fostered by experts' assertions that their children were unavoidably damaged by the absence of a mother available 24 hours a day. Other women, privileged enough to have husbands who provided the family's sole financial support, stifled a vague but disturbing awareness of the profound limits to their roles and opportunities. And doctors responded with a variety of mother's little helpers, tranquilizers, to ease their stress. So now she can cope. The message to girls was that their options were limited also. So here she says, he said my teeth were so good I could be his receptionist when I grow up. And some of the messages concerning women were even less subtle. Here's this ad. Men are better than women. Indoors, women are useful, even pleasant. On the mountains, they are something of a drag. This is an ad for sweaters. Here's one for ties. Show her it's a man's world. And one of my personal favorites, is it always illegal to kill a woman? Bombarded by such images and limited in their options, many women struggled with a lack of fulfillment dubbed the feminine mystique by Betty Friedan in 1963. The feminist movement of the 1960s and 70s showed that the two forces that La Follette had gathered together under a big tent were becoming diametrically opposed. Phyllis Schlafly's leadership in the Stop ERA campaign, Stop Taking Our Privileges, in the 1970s was successful because she, quote, turned it into a war among women over gender roles. Not only did women repeatedly come into conflict during efforts to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, but their differences continue to plague women's unity to the present day in skirmishes carried out on a variety of battlefields. Although the wide-ranging arguments used by Bella Follett and others helped to make the 19th Amendment a reality, a true victory, they also reinforced lasting cultural, political, economic, racial, ideological, and social differences between the sexes and among women. This polarization is particularly damaging because it has allowed some of the most powerful and constructive elements of La Follett's message to be lost. Her insistence that difference is not synonymous with inferiority, especially concerning reproduction and other factors based in physiology, and her support for the sisterhood of all women across race, class, and geographic borders. While we celebrate 100 years of women's voting, let's consider the work still left to be done to gain true equality for all. And thank you very much.
All right. So I'm sure you would hear clapping if everybody was unmuted. But so if you have any questions, I want to see hands. I don't see anybody's hands up yet.
Helen has her hand up.
Oh. Hold on. I don't see anybody hands raised with the Zoom thing, but so Helen, I can't really see you.
I can see her.
Okay. Okay, Helen?
I have a question about the phrase woman suffrage versus women's suffrage. Drives me nuts.
Yes, I share your frustration. And every time I publish on this subject, my solution is whatever the editor tells me. Some editors say we are doing women's suffrage, plural, and some say women's suffrage. And unfortunately, that is my rationale for what I choose. Okay. So I don't have a good answer. I think there are, fine differences, but in the modern day, I really don't think it matters. It's one or the other.
Okay. Thank you.
Certainly.
Looks like Mary Jane.
Mary Jane.
Mary Jane. I think you're unmuted. Wait, no, you're not. It's not unmuting. Mary Jane, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, now?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Good.
Oh, well, I thought that was so interesting. But,
thank you.
You did a great job. But what I wanted to say is also not a question, but if you stop sharing the screen, it's still up there, at least on my computer. And then we can see everybody.
All right, let me stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, great.
It was great. It was just great.
Oh, thank you. So let me ask you, because I have a couple of questions. This is my first Zoom presentation. It just seems to me that it's such a long time to just sit and stare at a screen. Are you doing okay with this?
I'm doing okay. It looks like there's a lot of clapping going on.
Okay, good.
By the way, people can use reactions too. So here's my thumb up. Ooh. So we have a number of people with their hand up actually in Zoom. So I'm going to start at the top here. We have Alex and Senna, and it is not unmuting. There you go. Alex, Senna, go ahead.
That was a wonderful, fascinating job as usual. I did wonder at what point, I know there was at some point where the women's movement came out very strongly in favor of and did a lot to help the blacks get the vote. At what point was that, or is there any reason to think that did not happen? I've heard so much about it.
Well, I think that it's a popular story, but I think it's not truly representative. That if you look at the major forces right at the time, we really didn't, we saw people like La Follette, and we saw later on white women who were working with black women. But one of the things that really shocked me as I was doing more research was how powerful that southern wall of opposition was in Congress, and how quickly some of my big idols, the women who I'd so admired, my big heroes, were just basically saying, well, that's too bad, but we've got to get the vote, and so we'll just go along with this, and really did not support. And even if they, in their personal lives, were not particularly racist, they, except for a few, they really were not willing to say, no, we're not going to go for this until we all are actually going to be able to have the vote. It was really quite appalling to me to see how many of my heroes really were not very heroic in this regard.
Well, that's certainly true in the overall length, but you don't feel that as the time got closer and people got more enlightened, that there was a shift overall, or at least a valuable assistance that women...
I really don't. I think there are individual instances of that, but I think they're the exceptions that sort of prove the rule. And that was one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize in this talk, is that I'm a little worried that the celebration of women's suffrage will be this, isn't this great? It's just an unadulterated success story. And I really think that, the racism that permeated this, whether out of expediency or true feeling, is something that we really need to address and grapple with. And certainly, Sandra, there are, many exceptions, but what's striking to me is how many women just, basically said, no, we'll just have to reassure Congress, and it didn't work for black women.
Well, that is disappointing. But the fact that black men got the vote so much sooner than women is sort of an example of what's happened and is still happening. That the blacks we certainly are anxious that we should all have equality in everything, but it does seem that men, including black men, get it ahead of women. And
again, I'm not so convinced that that's true, because that was the whole South's thing, was like, look, we've done a really good, officially black men have the vote, but we're doing a really good job of depriving them of that vote on a state-by-state basis. And if, women get the vote and people come in to see black women voting and so forth, it's going to kind of blow up that it's going to bring attention to this. So officially, yes, black men had the vote, and officially black women get the vote too, but they're through Jim Crow and so many other ways, they have to continue to fight for it. So again, there's a difference between what's on paper and what's actually, happening.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Paul, go ahead.
Okay. Get myself unmuted here.
You're unmuted.
Okay. Nancy, that was awesome. That was just really awesome. It was that first part, following up on Senator, that was painful to hear some of the racism that came through there. But I grew up in Tennessee, and my mother was born in 1999, so she turned 21 in May of 1920, and I still don't know how she voted, but which is too bad. It's during the last week or 10 days, I've seen a couple, seen two KQED specials, one on the national picture and one specifically on Tennessee.
Oh.
And the battle in Nashville during the weeks, maybe months leading up to that vote. in the Nashville legislature. And I'd never seen that one. So that was really, really informative.
Yeah, that was quite, as you know, it was quite a struggle. And in the end, the one man who put it over had been pressured by his mother.
Right.
Put in that final vote.
What she said was, be a good boy.
Yeah.
And be kind to your mother or something.
Yeah.
It was in her letter to him. Had the grocery list for him to pick up on the way home.
Right.
And be kind to your mother. I did have a serious question there too. One of the things I was wondering, I know there were a lot of women that opposed it. Do you have an idea about what the percentages were, pro and con, how that varied throughout the country, that women were opposed to vote? That
is a really good question, and I don't have a good simple answer to it. You can go back to the various state votes and see how they went. Which states approved and didn't. You can get a sense of that there. But of course, that only tells you how the men are voting. That doesn't tell you how women are responding. Right. And this doesn't answer your question, but I think it's interesting, so I'll tell you anyway. What was interesting to me is that how often in the more rural areas there was much more support for women's vote because women were such partners on the farm. And they were seen, I kind of thought it might be the opposite where, the urban people would be more sophisticated and support it, and it was the other way. But no, it's a very good question, and I don't have a good answer to it. It's hard. It was hard to really hard to discern that. Because, some women, it's easy to tell. They're on one committee or they're against, but so many weren't. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's a really good question.
Just one further comment. Of course, it wasn't until 1964 until there was effective voting rights for black folks in the South. Mm-hmm. And there was really a fight against that. I was living in Illinois, no, I was at the University of Michigan then. But in some counties, they just closed the registrar's office. So white or black, if you weren't already registered, you didn't get to vote. Right. And that's happened in a lot of them. But thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing this posted because I have a lot of extended family I'm going to share it with.
Well, that's great. And some of you who came in a little later, I want to give you my commercial that Friday night on American Masters on PBS, there was a show called Unladylike 2020. And I'm featured on that show. I'm talking about Jeannette Rankin, the first woman in Congress. And it's about a 53-minute program, and it features five women. And I hope you'll take a look at it. I've been working as a member of the board for this program for about 3 years now. We've done 26 9-minute shorts on various women. And I was really pleased when I talked on that program about Jeannette Rankin, who I've always really admired. I did say, and she was one of the ones who reassured the fellow members of the House that this wasn't going to disrupt the racial system. And I wasn't sure if they would keep that in. I thought they wanted more of kind of a feel-good, women's suffrage thing, and they kept it in. And I think there's a fair amount in that series that isn't just rah-rah for women. It's really, I think, good history and trying to present a more nuanced story. So if you're interested in any of this, I would encourage you to, you can view it online, and I hope you'll do so.
Okay. Just one final comment. I worked in the national office of the Women's Christian Temperance Union.
Oh.
In 1956, I guess. And it's in Evanston, Illinois. I was in graduate school there, and it was a nice job working with some really nice ladies and really sharp women. And I had a little package just that was close to the size of a cigarette package. I almost got fired one day, and they came and I was preparing packages to mail material, and they thought I was smoking there.
Oh no, they would not tolerate that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Dana.
Oh, she's not unmuted.
You have to unmute yourself, I think.
Yeah.
I can't unmute you. Dana.
No, you're still, you were unmuted, now you're muted again.
Oh, okay. I might have done it. Let's see.
There
we go.
Okay. Yes. I wondered if when did blacks get the right to vote? I'm not clear on that. I understand it was before women, but I wondered did that include black women?
No.
And
so I'm sorry. I'll let you finish your question. Go ahead.
That was all of it. Yeah.
Okay. I'm always so eager. I talk over people. I'm sorry.
When and did women? Yeah.
After the Civil War, we have it's the 15th Amendment, I believe, that gives black men the right to vote, and not women, but black men the right to vote. But that is as soon as Reconstruction is over, that's when we see the implementation of Jim Crow, and there are all kinds of methods used not to allow this to. There's the grandfather clause, and there's all kinds of literacy things and poll taxes and so forth. And so that was what the white members of Congress were so concerned about preserving. So they didn't want anything to disrupt that. So we don't see blacks really getting voting rights in this country until the Voting Rights Act of 1964, 1963. Anyway, in the 1960s. So yeah, that's how long the delay is.
Thank you.
Basically, almost 100 years.
Okay. Sorry about the muting thing. Like Zoom, if I muted people, only I can unmute them. But if they muted themselves, only they can unmute themselves. And there's no way to tell who did what. So sometimes we kind of have to like coordinate and figure it out. But on that, Emma, let's see. You might have to unmute your. Oh, there he goes. Emma, you're good.
It's interesting to see how people held on to their privilege in the past, and they came up with all these reasons, speculations, actually basically describing their fear of losing their privilege. And I'm wondering, you'd be interested in talking about the inequality issue today that's faced not just by women, by minority, by a lot of people. Do you feel that people really deeply care about equality, and they have a conflict regarding to privilege, and maybe they want to hold on their privilege, but then they also feel that they should be equal? What are the struggle today?
I think that you put your finger on a huge part of the struggle. I think that there are people who are the pretty easy ones to figure out, who are racist and sexist, and I don't think there's a lot of difficulty usually in identifying those people. Where I think things get complicated are, all of the, when you have privilege, whether it's based on sex or race or anything else, it's not something that you choose to take, and therefore you can choose not to take it. I mean, you have it, whether you want it or not. And I think it does frighten people, even at a level maybe that they can't articulate. What would it mean if I lost that? And so I think that there are a lot of people who are well-meaning, but don't quite recognize the privilege that they have, or somewhere kind of do and are concerned about it. I mean, I think that's a lot of what we're really seeing right now are people really sort of being forced to see their privilege, many people for the first time. So I think I think that's why everything is so fraught right now, is that I think giving up privilege is very hard for people. First of all, it's hard for them to recognize that they have it. And then even if you don't recognize that you have it, you do have it and you do exercise it. And so losing that, what will that mean? What will that look like? So I think that there's a lot of, on a very personal level, a lot of people are struggling with exactly what this means. I mean, I think it's just a fascinating and to me very exciting time, seeing what's going on.
Thank you.
Okay, Cheryl. I doesn't look like I can unmute you.
Yes,
You'll have to.
I've got it.
Oh.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. I don't know if you remember, I had you over at Slack. Good.
Yes, of course.
Yes, because I'm a long time retired from Slack, and the women's group doesn't have speakers like we used to. Anyway, this was very helpful because I had watched actually 3 programs on KQED about women getting the vote. One was a rerun of a much older program, and then the 2 new ones. Anyway, so you helped to explain some of that, but you said something that I would like you to explain. The Western states willing to give the women the vote when it was a state's decision, you said it was because there were a lot of men and they wanted women there or something. Could you, that didn't make sense. Why giving women the vote? They thought it would bring more women to live there?
Well, see, this is a great oversimplification. There are a lot of reasons that the West was more rapid in giving women the vote. But yeah, we'd had a lot of, the gold rush and so forth. That was the vast majority male. So we had a lot of the early settlers who came to the West where it was very, very male dominated. And they wanted women to come out. They particularly wanted young single women to come out to be school teachers, to be wives, to do things and so forth. So the feeling was, well, how can we make the West attractive to women? And so they weren't so concerned about getting women who were already married. They're going to do what their husbands tell them to do. But if you want young single women, you need to give them some incentive, some reason why you would come out and be out in the wilderness and leave your family and so forth. So one of the things that they were really trying to do to bring more sort of gender equity was to bring particularly young single women out to the West. So they were doing things like, if you were a young single woman, you could get a land grant. You could homestead, you could do things that there were some pretty unprecedented opportunities. And so I think that voting was just a way of helping to have that happen.
So somebody believed that giving women these rights and opportunities were attractive, that women really did want them. Somebody had understood that. This is the point. Somebody... Right. In those state legislatures or what have you, did appreciate that women wanted this very strongly.
Well, and particularly the women that they wanted. Again, not the women who were already married and, sort of property of their husbands and so forth, but these young single women that they were really hoping to attract. I think they thought that the vote would be appealing to them.
Thank you.
Okay. David, you have to unmute yourself. There we go.
All right, I got it. Hey, that was a good talk, Nancy. I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you.
You know what struck me in your talk, and I was wondering maybe you could talk a little bit more about it, is that during the suffrage movement, there were a lot of women who were like, basically, yes, but. They were like, yes, we want the vote, but we don't want black women to have the vote. And I'm just wondering, there's ways in which I see versions of that happening today in feminism. And I'm just wondering if, you've obviously looked into this stuff and studied this a lot more than I have. Do you believe that there's always a little bit of yes, but going on in the feminist movement?
Well, I think the feminist movement, is so broad, it's so expansive. Who's going to define it? Who says who's a feminist, what that means, and so forth. So, but I think in any movement, there's going to be some yes, but, some arguments and so forth. And I certainly don't think the feminist movement is any less susceptible to that than anything else. And I would just go back. I think, when you've said, that, yes, we white women want the vote, but we don't want black women to have it. I think that for a lot of those white women, it wasn't so much that, I think some didn't want black women to have it, period. They were racist themselves. But I do think for a lot of them, it's like, no, we would like all women to have the vote, but we are not going to get it from Congress if we don't exclude these black women, and therefore we will do that. So I don't know if that's splitting hairs too much to really matter, but I think there's a slight distinction there. But to answer your question, yeah, I think that in any major movement, people are not in lockstep, and there's going to be some real divisions over what this means. I mean, in the women's movement, the early women's movement, a lot of it was mutually exclusive. That was sort of my frustration with Bella Follett, is you can't have it all ways. You can't say women are equal to men in all ways, but women are naturally maternal and more moral and so forth. I mean, that's just a contradiction in terms. So yeah, I think it's, but I mean, I think any kind of progress is always going to be messy. So if we wait for the movement to be perfect, it will never occur, which doesn't mean you can excuse this stuff. You have to work it through and recognize it. But it's a complicated mess.
Yeah, I just see a lot of today, like, people kind of bashing the idea of like intersectionality, and I think that like what you presented showed that is nothing new. We just didn't have that language for it, or maybe that language wasn't being used in the discussion. Yeah, and it frustrates me, because I think you're exactly right. It's going on today. It was going on in the past. It is counterproductive to glorify the past. I mean, I don't want to erase history, but I think history is complicated. It's nuanced, and we don't do ourselves any favor if we ignore that when we study the past, because then we ignore it, as you're suggesting, when we look at the present. And it's omnipresent. It's always going to be there, and it requires some actual thought and discernment. All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Got a lot of hands up now. So I'm going to go to Alex and Senna. Looks like you have to unmute yourself.
No, you got to unmute.
Notice when you unmute me, I get a little window there that tells me I've got to unmute myself also.
Oh, good.
I don't know if other people get that. First of all, I wanted to comment about the idea of attracting women to the West. There's also the situation that a member of a family probably has different interests than a single person, and he'd appreciate having two votes with people with that view than one. Mm-hmm. I also wanted to, I don't know, it's not really a question, but I was saying that people seem to have a real need to believe they're better than others in some respect. Whites are better than blacks, men are smarter than women. And I think one of the things we see now is the question of voting rights for convicted criminals, which I think is kind of backwards too. I figure if you've got someone who understands what leads people to a life of crime and wants to vote, that's probably a very good combination. Anyway, I want to say once again, I do appreciate the talk, and I'm looking forward to checking out your PBS special.
Oh, well, great. I appreciate it. And while I'm shamelessly self-promoting, I also wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, I think last month, about how white people can use their privilege to support Black Lives Matter. So if you're interested, you can take a look at that too.
I will.
Right.
Okay. Back to Dana. Still muted. There
yes, this really opened up an intriguing question for me. My grandmother, Marie Suther, a Norwegian lady from Minnesota, went out to Montana during the early 20th century and had a homestead. And then she met someone and got married and had children and so on. And I would love to know whether having the right to vote in Montana had any bearing on her choice of destinations.
When did she arrive in Montana? Do you know?
Well, I don't know the date. I only know that she was my grandmother.
Uh-huh.
And so it would have been the early 20th century, probably somewhere between 1900 and 1920, I think.
Well, I mean, Montana got the vote early before the whole, national thing. So that could have contributed to it, or she could have just been, wanting to, it might have nothing to do with it because she just wanted that opportunity to homestead. And here was a place that she can do that. So I think the answer to that question would probably be, well, we'll never really know. But if she got there before women had the vote in Montana, then you'll know that wasn't an issue. That wasn't, a pull factor. But if she got there after women got the vote in Montana, it might have contributed.
What was the date on that?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and now I can't remember. I think 1914, 1915.
You've opened up a new possibility, because I think I'm going to ask some of my relatives that might know that.
Right.
And find out. It's kind of interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I know, Jeannette Rankin, when she gets the vote, she's, so it would be, 15, 16, somewhere in there, but don't quote me. You can Google it. Yeah.
Well, Rankin got into Congress just in time to vote against the World War I.
That was her first day, her very first day.
And they kicked her out because they didn't like it. And then she got back in just in time to vote against the Second World War. But what was the first state that gave women the vote? Was it Wyoming? And whichever state it was, do you know what year that was?
I don't. I'm one of these people who dates and so forth, I can look them up. So my brain is full. I can't say it. I'm one of those historians who doesn't know dates. It's pathetic, I realize. But I figure that's one thing I can look up pretty quickly. So I try to hang on to other stuff. But no, I'm bad with dates. But I mean, I keep them in my notes normally so I can sound like I know what I'm doing. But I'm not good with dates. But it was, and I don't know which state was first. I know it was a Western state, but I don't remember which one. Somebody asked me something I can answer. So,
sorry.
I just want to point out, Greg posted in the chat that Montana voted for equal suffrage on November 3rd, 1914.
1914. See, there, I knew the answer. 1914. Yes, 1914. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So, back to Emma.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So I have two comments. I have heard women complain about how their mother oppressed them, that their mother wanted to be feminine like a woman. Yeah, they want to accomplish more things like a man can. I just want to say that when people are severely oppressed, they have to internalize the oppression. So in this case, the women have to believe they are really inferior than men if they are severely oppressed, because to think they are equal and yet they don't face such an oppression is just very hard to live. So they choose to believe, yes, women are inferior, but that's just a reflection of their oppression. Okay.
Well, Emma, let me interject, and then I'll let you talk some more. I think that in the earlier period in American women's history, the argument was never that women are inferior. It's just that it was usually religious based. God has given both sexes these two very different sets of skills and so forth. And that, yes, men have political superiority, but women are morally superior. I mean, I think that it wasn't just like, women are just, beneath us and they're inferior and they're weak. Although there was certainly, some of that. But a lot of it was couched more in terms of, no, there's just sort of natural differences. I don't think that most men saw themselves as oppressors of women. I think they saw themselves as, well, there's just these two different ways of living. And I think that many women who didn't want the vote didn't say, we don't want the vote because we believe we're inferior. They said this vote will take away sort of some of our natural privileges that we are presented. The idea was women were too good to vote. They were up on a pedestal. So there's a lot of sort of psychological stuff in here. So I think that if you read I kept thinking, who are these women who are against suffrage? Who could possibly not want the vote? But many of them felt that it would drag them down, that it would somehow impair what they considered their rightful place. So I think it's more complicated than just accepting inferiority. But anyway, Emma, go ahead.
Yeah, your explanation is good. I guess I have more of a view of the entire world. And there are certain cultures where women are much more severely oppressed than American women in the 18th century, even today. Okay, and they have to deal with it. And they have to internalize the oppression in a way. Okay, so another comment I want to make is that there is a great deal of danger to consider oneself a victim. And the reason I said that is because I have seen, say, minority men who claim there is a racism, but there is no sexism. Sexism doesn't exist. Okay, and so the same thing for white women. They claim that there is sexism, but there's no racism. Racism is just a bunch of baloney. Okay, so basically, I think what boils down to a lot of people are not really fighting for justice, not fighting for equality. They are fighting for their own benefit. Okay, in this case, they are not that different from the people they are fighting against because, both sides want benefits. For themselves. So I think this political fight often creates identity that's, I think, is not so wonderful. Okay, and it also makes us accusing other people and without looking at ourselves, and that is a problem.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think a lot of it comes back to my obsession with this notion of privilege and who has it and how much they recognize it. And some of the early feminist movement of the early 1970s, they would have these women's consciousness raising movements, and white women would invite women of color to come in, and then they would say, okay, now, but we're all just sisters under the skin. We're all, we're leaving race at the door because this is just about sisterhood and so forth. And the women of color would say, but these white women brought their whiteness with them. They just didn't realize it because it was so, they were so used to their, because that's who they are, and they have this white privilege they didn't quite recognize. So I think that there's a lot of, this issue of, saying, oh, no, we aren't sexist, or we aren't racist, or whatever. I mean, I think it's people don't think that they don't intend to be. But this issue of privilege is, like I say, because it's something you don't choose to take, because you just have it. Sometimes very hard to recognize. I think it's one of the biggest sort of barriers that we have.
Actually, I feel that the hardest thing to face privilege is because our identity is a lot tied to it. If you tell somebody that their accomplishment that has a lot to do with their privilege, they will feel a big loss because a lot of their satisfactions they derive from the fact, look, I have accomplished this. I can get this big house. I have done all this. They feel very proud of it. And if you tell them, yeah, part of it is your work, part of it is your privilege, they won't feel very good, and they don't like that. And I think that's my perception, why recognizing privilege is such a difficult thing.
Oh, and I think you're absolutely right. I remember having an argument with my racist father saying, well, he said, well, he worked really hard for all that he had, blah, blah, blah. And I said, yes, absolutely. I know that you did. But just, on the basis of being white, you got opportunities to work really hard that, other people didn't get. And this was not something that he could fathom. And so I know firsthand exactly what you're talking about. I've seen it in action. Yeah.
Okay. Fran. Or Jim.
Actually, it's Jim. First off, I'd like to say that it was an excellent presentation. That constant flow of illustrations with very naval narration really made it a very interesting format, very good presentation. Second, I would like to say that some time ago, there was a program on PBS on the suffrage movement in England, which was astoundingly violent. And I wondered if you might want to make a comment on that.
Well, this is where Alice Paul said, look what's going on in England. They're making headlines. Why are we just being polite and writing petitions and so forth? So Alice Paul was very excited about what was going on in England and had seen some of this stuff firsthand. And people like Bella Follett were like, oh, that's just so strident, and we shouldn't be doing that. And Alice Paul said, but it gets headlines, and this is what we should be doing. And so that was a lot of what inspired her to have some of these big marches and the picketers in front of the White House. That was very much inspired by the British suffragettes. Who, as you say, were much more, they would go into Congress and shout, or into Parliament and, shout and do all kinds of stuff. And it was a hard sell for the more ladylike, moral, uplifting types like Bella Follett to buy that. But Alice Paul said, no, this is what we got to do.
I think they even resorted to a bomb or two, didn't they?
Well, they may have. I'm not so up on that, but I know, as you say, they were very active.
Yeah, that's what amazed me. I think that they mentioned that they even used a bomb or two.
Okay. And we're back to Alex and Senna. Probably need to unmute yourself.
It's me. I wanted to say about Montana that there were a lot of farming and so forth there, and that farming was pretty much a mutual thing. Both of them were necessary for the success of it, and I think I always thought that was why they were so quick to give to give women the vote. And I also wanted to say that it is unfortunate that the so-called scientific belief of the time was of the inferiority of the races, but and that was the culture that people were embedded in. It's important for a full understanding of other people, of other people's. Oh, I tried to write this. It's important for a full understanding of the views of the inexplicable views of people of the time to realize they were embedded in it. Everybody believed that stuff.
Well, I would say, though, that this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, is not everybody believed that stuff. And I hear this all the time. The classic thing is, Thomas Jefferson, who, wrote the Declaration of Independence and all these great things, but he's, is a slave owner, and, well, he's a product of his times. Well, many of his neighbors were debating with him whether slavery was right or wrong. And he said, I tremble for my country when I think that God is just. Yeah. You can look at this time that we've just been talking about this morning, and we have people like Bella Follett and others who are standing in solidarity with African Americans and saying, no, this is immoral and it's wrong. So I think that people are a product of their times, and that's true to a great degree. But I think it needs to be recognized, and I really believe that. But I also think that it can be used a little too glibly sometimes, almost sort of like they're just a product of their times, as if, there wasn't controversy within the times about this, and weren't discussions and people debating this. So I think that both those are true. There's the times, but within it, people weren't in lockstep. There were
disagreements, and we have the creation of the NAACP, and we got all kinds of stuff going on. So I think it's a nuanced situation. Well, it does sound as though the groups that you named were kind of the upper class, the intelligentsia of the time. Certainly had a lot of questions, but I don't think that was true of the normal, ordinary people. Well, of course, you have to remember that Black people are ordinary people, and they are certainly not, accepting this. And so, again, I just think it's complicated. Okay.
All right. And we're back to Paul. Paul, you're good to go?
I just want to note it was 1890 when Montana recognized that women should have a right to vote. And another, you mentioned Alice Paul and her fasting. There was a video of that included in the program I saw this past week. Boy, they were serious about it. She was held down by, looked like half a dozen people, and about 8-foot garden hose with a funnel in one end of it and the other end pushed into her mouth. And some mixture of milk and something, I didn't know what they said, eggs. And it was fierce. And,
it permanently destroyed her digestive system. They did permanent damage to her with that force feed. Yeah,
that was one tough woman. She was awesome.
All right. Looks like we don't have anybody else with their hands up right now, so I'm going to go ahead and allow everybody to unmute themselves so we can go into the general discussion. So you should be able to unmute yourself. I just want to make sure everybody remembers, like, more than one person is talking at the same time. We can't hear anybody, so please be respectful of other people and, you know, try to coordinate and work out who's speaking so we can have one at a time. But other than that, you're good to go.
I have a quick comment, or a couple of them really quick. You were saying something, Nancy, about people who went out to the West, and there was a picture of a woman, one of the women who had the university sashes, said Leland Stanford, and I guess some of the women, young single women, were able to go out there because Stanford began admitting women right away, that was an encouragement to go out there. And so women graduated from Stanford in the early years, whereas a lot of the Ivy League schools didn't allow women until the 1970s. That's one thing.
And I would add that Stanford was not like it is today. It was affordable back then.
Yeah, that too. The other thing was, you're talking about the force feeding. I remember the show on Masterpiece Theater years ago, which I think was part of it was in the Suffragette movie that came out a few years ago, about Emmeline Pankhurst and her sister and all that, and they were force-fed in England when they were trying to get the vote, and that was pretty brutal.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that Montana, I'm going to start the video, Montana is one of the earliest to allow women to vote. I would never think something, of Montana. There's something, very cowboy, outdoorsy, macho type thing in Montana that I see. So I find this very interesting. I don't know. I just.
Well, I would just add that I think it was something that Senna said, that we have a partnership with men and women. There's a respect for women, and also a real desire to get women out there, particularly the young single women that they want to to help build this society. So Montana was eager to build its women's population.
Very interesting.
I'm wondering about the desire to feel superior than other people. I think somebody mentioned that before. A lot of people have a strong desire to feel superior, and they identify certain group of people that must be below them. And of course, if they have that kind of mental attitude, they will not treat these group of people very well. And I also think that desire to feel superior actually rooted in feelings of inferiority. And because they feel inferior, and therefore they want to balance their feeling by thinking that they are really superior. Okay, I'm wondering what's the best way to help these people to recognize, first of all, I guess this feelings inferiority can be very strong. And how do you help these people to deal with it? And in the hope that they won't want to feel superior than certain people.
Boy, Emma, if we could answer that question, I think we could really make a tremendous amount of progress, not just in this country and around the world. I think you've really put your finger on what motivates, so many people. Unfortunately, I don't have a good, solution for that, and I wonder if anybody else here would care to comment.
I think part of the problem is it's very hard to believe that you've got more than you deserve. And if you have a privilege and you're going to share that, that kind of reduces your own privilege.
I think that if you become friends with people who have a very different social status from you, and you see how they live, and you see the kind of opportunity, their struggles, you will begin to see that how much privilege you have. You will realize, people will realize they are not that much hardworking compared with certain unprivileged people. They are not much more smarter than those unprivileged people. And so it takes understanding, to see our privilege.
Well, I think, Emma, I think you're right about that, but you have to be willing to see yourself as privileged and to make that effort. And I think that's where so much of the problem is.
So what you're saying is people just have a big mental block about privilege. They just don't want to even go there.
Well, I just think, like I say, it's something that so many people, I'm not an expert on this, but I think like all of us have been thinking a lot about this, particularly in recent times. And I just think that I remember reading a book called The Gender Knot, and it was really helping me to understand this notion of privilege as something, like I said, what really struck me is it's not something that you choose to take, you have it. And when you have something, I think it's very hard to often hard to recognize that you have it and other people don't. It's just what you're used to, what you have. And so I think to recognize that privilege before you can challenge it, understand it, see what it's done for you, see how the lack of it limits other people. There's that leap that has to come in, and that's a hard leap. It's I think particularly because as you suggested, most people like to think, oh, I did this myself, and it's like, well, yes, you did, and because you were allowed to, because of your privilege, that can be hard for I think for some people to take. So I've been so much encouraged in the last couple of months with people having really some hard discussions about this. So I actually feel more optimistic than I have for a long time. But whether this is going to be, this initial burst is going to be enough, I don't know.
Yeah. But I also have to point out that I'm not sure people, all the white people have experience a whole lot of privilege. I think if they live in a predominant white neighborhood and work in a predominant, it's all white company, I do not see they have any privilege because they are competing with other white people. And these people may say, well, I don't have any white privilege because they are not in that environment.
Actually, I think I grew up in Tennessee. One of my grandfathers was a sharecropper. Meant that we picked cotton on one side of the field and the black folk picked it from the other side. But there were a lot of folks. We lived in McNairy County when I was 6. Probably, if it wasn't the poorest state in the county in the state, it was close. There were no hard surface roads. Just before we moved from there, they built one. But there were no newspapers delivered. Dad got the Memphis paper delivered. But segregation, making the black population lower, meant that at least you weren't at the bottom. You knew you were a long, long way from the top, but you weren't. You had it better than somebody. And I think that there was a lot of self-image. You know, who are you? What? You knew you didn't have any money. You weren't going to make it on that. Both my parents had college degrees, but I didn't know any other people who had college degrees. My dad was a minister, so he was in a little bit of a separate category from sharecroppers, which everybody else in the area that I knew. But I think there's a big thing about not wanting to be at the bottom. I mean, you don't want to be, that's not the attention you want to get. Don't have to be first, but I don't want to be last. And the assumption was that then that those who you could believe. I didn't know any black folks until I was never in school with a black person until 1956, no, 54, when I went to Evanston, and but there was always that difference. In fact, I went to seminary in Evanston, and there were no black students. I graduated in '58, and actually there weren't many when I came to Berkeley after that. And there weren't many black students at Berkeley, or many other than white.
Looking back, growing up on the East Coast, there was kind of an assumption that there were two types of people in the world. There were white people and there were black people. I suppose there were Indians also. There were very few of them. And the ethnic composition of the country's changed a lot. We've got a lot more, in various parts of Asia, Indians, Chinese.
You know, I wonder if striving for a position in a group isn't typical of animals. I mean, look at dogs. They all fight with each other and establish a dominant person that's the head dog. And I wonder to what extent that operates in humans, that we kind of tend to organize ourselves in groups dominated by a person who's seen as a strong leader, and some kind of tendency, and that's where this striving for position comes from. It's partly, anyway, just an observation.
I think you have to look at apes and chimpanzees more than dogs if you're wanting to understand where human proclivities come from. We're much more related to the great apes, orangutans and gorillas and what have you than we are to dogs. And there are lots of books who've tried to understand where, written about this topic of where our human characteristics come from over millions of years of evolution. That's all.
Thank you.
I just want to throw in there, because I've looked up a lot of stuff about. I don't want to say studied, so to speak. YouTube studied, but on particularly talking about like alpha male, and that came from like the alpha male kind of idea came from studies of wolves, and apparently the original study, the original scientist who came up with this, later, I don't think he officially retracted it, but does not support his conclusion anymore, finding out that in reality, what he thought was like the alpha male or the alpha of the pack were just the parents of the pack, where they were and everybody else in all the other wolves were children. There's a great I'm sure you can find this short video on YouTube somewhere by Adam Ruins Everything. If anybody knows that guy, he's a comedian who talks about these different kind of things and ruins everything by pointing out why everybody thinks is wrong. But there's one on the alpha male, and he ruins the alpha male. It's a really good short video on that.
I'm just going to say something about privilege, and there's a small group of Black people at a higher level that think everybody else who's Black should be able to do the same thing they did, not realizing the financial situation. I think of Ward Connerly, who fought for the Proposition 209, the affirmative action that's about to be overturned. And then Clarence Thomas is just like, oh yes, why can't everybody do what we managed to do? Well, if you don't have bootstraps, you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And the privileged Black people seem to have forgotten that there are different levels in their group as well as whites versus Blacks.
Alpha male is actually a very interesting topic. I used to live with a group of young people, and these are smart young people. And I noticed that there's one young man who I consider an alpha male, and he commands a lot of respect and a lot of cooperation. But this guy is definitely a male chauvinist. And often alpha male are the one who is actually the driving force for men's desire to be seen as a man and for men's desire to be superior than women because the alpha males say so, and therefore these are successful men, and therefore they should listen to their opinions. Okay. And I also see that among these young people, how they different from my generation is that they do recognize women are smart. They do recognize women are the future. However, they feel very uncomfortable about it. Okay. And I think because they feel so uncomfortable, they also try very hard to unconsciously to suppress the women who are smart and capable.
I was wondering if there's any, I don't see much about it, but it seems to me shortly after the women's movement became popular, probably late 60s, early 70s, there was a lot of talk about the situation of sex workers. There are organizations like Coyote and so on that refer to themselves as an organization of loose women. I was wondering how that fits into the feminist movement, ideology, or perspective at this time.
Well, it's like everything else. That you could be a feminist and say there's no such thing as sex work. There's only exploitation and prostitution, and this is an outrage, and it's bad for women, it's bad for society, it's terrible. There are feminists who say, like Coyote, come off your tired old ethics. If a woman chooses to be a sex worker, that's her. That's her right, and we should support that. The same thing with pornography. Feminists who say pornography works against women, it really damages them. We need to get rid of it. Others saying we have free speech in this country. People have the right to do whatever they want. So I don't even think you can say there's a feminist line on a number of these things. I think that it's such a big, broad movement that I don't think there's here's the feminist position on this, or here's the position, there's usually within it, there's a variety of different perspectives. But I think that's one of the things that keeps the movement going, is it's not just this lockstep thing. This is what we believe. There's a lot of room for debate and argument. And I think that that's an important part of the feminist movement, being able to continue on and move forward.
Okay, yeah. We do seem to be living in an age of pornography. It's readily available to everyone.
Well, the internet, I think, just allowed it to absolutely explode. Because you can do it in the private. You didn't have to go buy anything. You could just, in the privacy of your own home, nobody would ever know, and it really has.
You're required to assert that you're over 18 or something.
I'm sorry?
I say you have to click on a button that says you're over 18.
Yeah, that's.
I've heard.
Some of the arguments I've heard around the internet and pornography are that to some extent the internet allows for more amateur porn, and a lot of people who might be otherwise like opposed to pornography, understand that even if there is exploitation in the industry, two people deciding to make a film themselves and put it on like XTube or whatever, there's somebody might still be being exploited, don't get me wrong, but there's the structure's gone there, and so like the advent of amateur porn and even like live streaming porn kind of allows people to take some of the power back from the moneyed interests that were controlling it before.
Yeah, the other things, we all need money, and the border between working for a living and being exploited is can get a little vague.
You don't say. Well, like that's a good point though, because somebody who has to work two jobs just to make ends meet is potentially being exploited by their employers and possibly by their landlords. And a lot of times, maybe the people who talk about the exploitation in porn or sex work are like, maybe silent on those issues. And it's not like there's just one way that people can be exploited, like for money or whatever.
What is the state? I think they have frozen rents, and they have said we don't have to pay on certain rents. But
Matthew, you're muted. There you are.
Yeah, it told me I was muted. I forgot. I keep muting it because there's some background noise that I'm trying to keep out. And anyways, David, do you want to mention the new podcast that we're doing that's kind of related to feminism, but kind of on the other side?
Yeah. There's I'll try to say this in a way that in a different way than I would usually say it. There's a movement. They call themselves men's rights activists, or the manosphere, and we're working on a show. We put out the first episode. I need to work on my ability to read off the history of things a little bit better, I think. But there's a segment of the manosphere called MGTOW. It's men going their own way, where they have like decided that they don't want women in their lives, or maybe they only want women in their lives for the purpose of as sex objects. So we've decided to call the show MGTOWN. We've already elected the mayor, and it's the I didn't want to bring this up too much because it's like a little outside of the scope here, but certainly there's like anti-feminist movements sort of that I think are disguising themselves as civil rights movements advocating for the rights of men, and it's we're certainly. Oh, I'm sorry. We're working on that right now, so it's a new thing. It's something we've always kind of gone over on the shows and whatnot, but it's getting its own thing, and it's definitely, because I know Matt used to be in men's groups back in the day, and it's there's good things to be had in men's groups where men get together and discuss what they're struggling with in life, especially the way we've sort of like trained men in a lot of ways to suck it up and just walk it off in a lot of ways. But I think that a lot of the kind of discussion around like men's issues is being exploded by a bunch of sexist people. So yeah, it's a tough subject to go after, but it's sort of in my wheelhouse because I don't have a problem going after tough subjects. I mostly did it because I thought Matt would be a real useful person to have on that, because he's been in men's groups before. But Nancy, what do you like as far as like issues that do affect men, that affect men differently from women? Like where do you come from on that? Like my position is that like most feminists I've met care about those issues just the same as the men are being affected by those things. But maybe if you have something to say about that, that'd be good.
I'm saying, what issues are we talking about?
Oh, just like for example, men are like because of the way that we sort of socialize boys and girls, and hopefully it's changing a little bit, but men are like less inclined to talk about their personal struggles, their feelings, and how they're just how they feel, and if they're sad or upset, or like we're only really allowed to express anger, kind of. And like, do you think that maybe modern feminism has some answers for that, or do these things you think about?
Yeah, I mean, my hope is that if feminism really becomes what I think you can all understand, humanism, if the idea is that women shouldn't be limited in the straitjacket of what it means to be a woman in the same way that men should not be limited in the straitjacket of what it traditionally meant to be a man. I mean, I think that a rising tide should raise all boats. So my feeling is that that's what we want for everybody, is to not be straitjacketed by old ideas about what gender meant. So I think that's something, if we're doing this right, it should be uplifting and freeing for everyone.
I wanted to mention rankism. We had a speaker many, many years ago at the Humanist community who talked about rankism, which was a new idea to me. And the basic idea is that rankism is about abuse of power, and it applies to sexism, racism, ageism, and a whole bunch of things. And I think what's really useful about the concept is a person who's privileged in one area and not privileged in another area may have a better appreciation, if he thinks about it, to the benefit. In other words, like
right.
I don't know. Am I clear enough? Well, maybe not. But it's like a white woman might say, "Oh, I've been discriminated against as a woman, so maybe I can understand the problems the blacks would have."
I think that's Belle LaFollette says, exactly what you just said. She said, she doesn't know what it's like to be black, but she knows what it's like to be discriminated against on the basis of something arbitrary, like sex or, whatever. So, yeah, I think that there's real validity to that whole notion.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think this rankism thing is very real. Basically, I see that the society is made of many, many different layers of privileges, and there are people on the top, and there are, somebody slightly below, and there's another type of people slightly below. Okay, and there are people on the bottom. The people on the bottom, not only not having much privilege, they are also very much mistreated by the people above them, especially immediately above them, because people have anger. For example, we all heard this scenario, like a man got yelled by the boss, and he came home to yell at the wife. The wife yelled at the kids killed the dog. Kicked the dog. So basically, people feel, they have to take in the abuse from people who have power over them. And the way to balance themselves is to abuse the people below them. Okay, so they don't feel like terrible about it. And so that is something we all need to be aware of. And I feel the society doesn't really talk about this particular phenomenon, about their different many layers of a social status or rank. Okay.
I mean, we do talk about it. We have a saying called "the shit rolls downhill," right? Like, it's not like we don't talk about it, but we talk about it in a sort of a way that it's like a matter of fact, and that's the way of the world. Like you're saying, we should maybe talk about why that's the way of the world, and ways to improve upon it and make that happen less, and maybe make the shit not roll onto anybody.
Yeah, I feel there is a lot of emphasis like race or gender. Okay, but there isn't really that much talk about, there are layers and layers of social status.
Well, it's because I'm in academia, this is all we talk about all the time. So I think the problem is getting it out from sort of this rarefied group in academia and getting this spread more, because this is a lot of what we do. So I think those conversations are going on. It's sort of like David's suggesting, where are they going on? Who's having them? Who's having these recognitions? And this is why, to get up back on my soapbox, I love talking to the humanist community, because there aren't that many opportunities for those of us who are in academia who think about this a lot. But what good does that do anybody? You have to actually be able to to reach people and have a real conversation. And so I'm really grateful to this group because it's exciting to be talking to people who are interested in issues and thinking about them, and have created this forum to do that. And I also want to say that when the virus hit, and I thought, oh, I'm not going to be able to give that talk, and I was so disappointed. And so I think it's wonderful that you're doing this via Zoom, and all of you people are here doing this. I mean, I think if we had a lot more people doing what this group is doing, we could tackle a lot of the stuff that that Emma and Paul and so many of you are identifying. So maybe I'm just too quick to pat everybody on the back, but I think it matters. I think it's important.
Yeah, I think. In academia and the real world are very different. And one major difference is the concept of power. In academia is fairly, there's some power thing, but in the real world, people hush about power, and because they don't want to talk about power, and it become a big blind spot in people. Okay, for example, people painted Black Lives Matter, and there are some white people who say, no, all life matter. Okay, as though that Black Lives Matter is about favoring Black. But what these white people do not see is a huge power difference between white and Black. And that's what is behind the Black Lives Matter thing. So that's just an example.
I want to break in.
Go ahead, Matt.
I want to break in real quick. We are past 1 p.m. We're technically done. We're over time, but I'm fine with leaving the Zoom meeting up. I just want to let everybody know, and probably our Twitch stream will go down if it hasn't already gone down.
No, I'm good. I'm kind of enjoying this. I had a few more questions and things I wanted to talk about too. So. And it seems like a hot topic. Everybody's interested, so I'll leave the Zoom meeting running, and we can continue our discussion. Nancy, I wanted to ask, you're in the social sciences. Is this accurate? I'm like a layman. I'm not an academic, so.
It depends on what survey I'm filling out. Sometimes I'm called the humanities, sometimes the social sciences. History seems to kind of straddle.
Okay, so some of what we do is we've been covering. Well, there's a group of public intellectuals who have all but called for the abolition of the social sciences, claiming that they're Marxist in nature, and that if you know about the conspiracy theories about the Frankfurt School and whatnot. And I don't know, I find social sciences to be pretty valuable, and I think that it's it's really good that the humanist community especially has people from the social sciences on, because there's a big rift in the non-believer community between a lot of people who don't like the social sciences, probably because they critique what some of those people say about social sciences or issues about how we live together in society. And I'm just really glad that this humanist community isn't just another atheist group where you just have, it's just not another atheist group. There's more to it here. There's more to it than your average atheist or skeptic group. And I just guess I wanted to thank you for coming, and thank the organizers for not only having science talks, but having not only having hard science talks, but also having social scientists and people from the humanities on here. I think it's really important to kind of have that balance, no matter what you're studying.
Well, obviously, as a historian, I think history is crucial to everything, and we learn so much, so forth. But I'm glad to hear you say that. And every time I've spoken with the humanists, and I think this is my 12th time, it's always been so interesting. I've really learned a lot. And I would just follow up, David. there's a cartoon strip. I read the paper every day. I'm that old that I still read a physical newspaper. And there's a cartoon strip called Mallard Fillmore, and it's this incredibly conservative thing. And he spends about every other strip denigrating academia and how we're all a bunch of flaming Marxists and all we want to do is, tear down the country and blah, blah, blah. And and I think, God, who are these academics who spend their days doing that? Where do I get on that train? I mean, I actually have to teach classes and learn and grade papers and, do all this stuff. So I do get impatient when academics is sort of presented as intellectual masturbation and we're really not, having some kind of impact. And it's been exciting to me with this whole explosion of Black Lives Matter that there really does seem to be this interest in history and how exactly did we get to this place and why did it not change earlier? And I think there's recognition that there's real value, that we're not just sort of sitting in an ivory tower, but we can help. Just give us a chance to do that. And so I don't know if it really responds to your comment, but that's my thought.
That's fine. I mean, I wandered a little bit. I'm on the spot here. It's not like I had time to prepare any questions or anything. So like my questions are going to be imperfect. And if your answers don't 100% address them in your own opinion, that's fine with me. Yeah. I just see a lot of people. What is
the Frankfurt school you mentioned? Or the Franklin school?
There was no school. There's a conspiracy theory. It's called cultural Marxism. It basically states that the Soviet Union and the other Marxists couldn't take over via military power, so they've invaded the institutions, especially academia and especially the social scientists. It's a fringe theory popular among white nationalists, white supremacists, anti-Semites, and certain public intellectuals that we do a whole show about. Some of them won't just say they're talking about cultural Marxism, but its roots are in a term called cultural Bolshevism from the Third Reich, and it's just like a rebranding of that idea. And it's basically saying like Marxist Jewish people have taken over academia, and the comic strip Nancy described probably is like dog whistling that pretty hard. And there's no such thing as a Frankfurt school, but if you wanted to learn more about it, there's a pretty good Wikipedia article on it. Most of the time I think Wikipedia doesn't do a good job on this kind of stuff, but the Frankfurt school article is real good.
Another thing I just wanted to comment is it seems like one of the results of this shelter in place is fathers are spending a lot more time with their kids than they used to. Probably a lot. No, and I may be comparing it to when I was young, which was a hell of a long time ago. I think that's probably a good thing.
Well, I would say it's interesting to me. So I've been teaching women's history for about 30 years now. And I asked my students, when we get up to feminism, and I asked them about the feminist movement and how do they see that it's impacted their lives. And the two things that tend to come up the most are sports, their involvement in sports, and their involvement with their fathers. And they talk about, their dad was, a full-time dad, or they spent, there's a real sense of having two parents in a partnership. And now Santa Clara is certainly not representative of, all colleges, but I would just say that over the last 30 years, I'd say that was one of the things that has really been striking to me. It's very different from my own childhood. The idea that of fathers really being actively involved in their children's lives, and I'm sure, based on my own family members and so forth, it's all the more so now because you don't have any choice. I mean, everybody's locked in. Yeah.
I wanted to comment on the All Lives Matter part. I remember soon after Black Lives Matter started, I was on some group and I mentioned that All Lives Matter, and I got a lot of grief for that. And I think because people thought I was belittling Black lives, but I look at it as Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, but others do too. The Native Americans, I think, have got even a worse deal than the Blacks. I mean, that's debatable, but Blacks aren't the only racial group or ethnic group, whatever, that are being discriminated against the country. And I'm not happy that we're focusing so much on Blacks and not on the others. The others are getting left out.
Anna, do you feel that white people were also being discriminated against?
Do I think that white people are being discriminated against?
Yes.
Well, it depends on the context. I mean, there's all kinds of discrimination. So, but I'm not going to make any generalities about white people being discriminated against. I agree that white people have this. Look, I'm a white male. I've definitely had a privileged life in every category you can think of. The only time I've ever felt the slightest discrimination was when I was in Hawaii and somebody referred to me as a haole. But that's one small incident. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, because you mentioned all life matter, as though the white people are also very much discriminated against.
No, I'm not saying that white people are discriminated. I'm just simply saying that, you know, there are other groups besides the blacks that are being discriminated, like Native Americans. As near as I mean, I don't know, but as near as I can tell, Native Americans are getting even a worse deal than black Americans.
I think the thing is, in this country at this time, the blacks seem to have a real problem interfacing with the police, and there have been a lot of shootings, and we hear a lot about it. And in a discussion like that, to say white lives matter is almost like changing the subject altogether. Yeah. By the way, I understand in Israel there's a movement called Palestinian Lives Matter.
I wasn't arguing white lives matter. I was arguing all lives matter.
Marianne, you have to unmute yourself.
No, Mary Jane, you got to unmute.
Mary Jane.
Yeah.
Unmute yourself. I'm trying to, yeah, I see you.
Okay. So I think, that I really don't like hearing when people say white lives matter, because to me, it's like, well, that is not even the issue. You know, and that is like a facade even for people who are actually, to me, it's like saying, let's stop a minute and talk about women who rape men or something like that. You know, it's like, so please don't say that anymore, because I think there's a bunch of people, usually when something like that is mentioned in that kind of context, it's to hide behind, you know, it's just like, yes, of course, why? It just goes without saying why everybody's lives matter. Maybe if you want to get your point across, say, well, of course, you know, but also indigenous people, and, you know, name some specific groups, but to lump all lives matter, everybody in that category is...
Who is discriminated against depends on what kind of, what the group is that they're embedded in. If you're Catholic and you're in a certain area, then you're the one that's prejudiced against, and on and on. And also, the thing about what people do and what choices they make has a lot to do with money. You'll do a lot of things to survive and to see your children survive that you wouldn't do by choice.
Yeah, and also it's just the thing I wanted to, you know, about the indigenous thing, what was really nice to see in the protests was that there was a lot of solidarity from the indigenous community. And myself being gay, it was nice to see a lot of solidarity from the LGBT communities in these protests for the movements for Black lives. And so I think a lot of times, like when people respond with all lives matter, it seems like it just seems trite and dismissive. You know, it's not to say that like if I say Black lives matter, I'm not saying that someone else's life doesn't matter. Like right now, like it's in the news and it's been kind of in everybody's mind that like Black folks are getting it pretty bad from the police right now. And that's sort of what's going on with the movement. And I think that, you know, Dana, I've seen you in these before, and I know where you stand, and you're on the right side of these issues. I think that it's just the wording and the way that other people have used it in the past in response to Black Lives Matter that elicits that response. Do you know what I'm saying?
It's Jerry, not Dana, that spoke. But yeah.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Maria. Yeah. I think this conversation kind of represents what I was talking about. I come from the perspective that I think that there's so much fighting between groups. And I personally view it as the biggest problem we've got now is essentially the oligarchy against the rest of us. I'm very unhappy that so many people are fighting with other groups and aren't fighting the oligarchy, because that's where the real problem is.
But Jerry, that's another discussion. That's all. It's you know.
Yes,
they intersect.
I think it's a worthwhile discussion.
Well, they intersect too. They intersect. Like
people, maybe make it clear, like, well, yes, that's true. Black Lives Matter. But my personal concern is the oligarchy or something. You know, go off into another.
Well, Jerry may have had a lot of black folks oppressing him. So if he has, then could address that. But that's not my experience.
Exactly. No. I think you're saying the same, Paul. Right.
The other thing here
exactly.
is the other thing here is that class and race and gender identity, sex, sexual orientation, these things all intersect in a lot of ways. It's not like when we talk about class, we're not talking about race, and when we talk about race, we're not talking about class, because the way the power structure is, race maps onto class, gender maps onto class, especially like for trans people. Like that maps onto class, because those people have a much harder time getting a job than anybody right now because of the discrimination against them. So these aren't like really separate issues. And like a lot of times I have a lot of problems with some leftists and Marxists. I think that they're like class reductionist. And I think that they assume that if we somehow magically solve the class problem, that we will abolish racism. And that's oversimplification of some people's view. But these things are all part of the same soup. And it's important. It's at least for me, it's been important for me to understand that when I talk about race, that I'm not eliminating class. That race is a class problem. You know, that you just look at the socioeconomic status of your average white guy in their early 40s, like me, versus the average black guy in their early 40s, and the average black guy and me aren't different. You know, we don't have different. You know, we're not. We don't have, I don't have some kind of superior reasoning power or ability to get things done. I understand that the average socioeconomic class of somebody like me, even with me being a gay man, is going to tend to be higher than a black person because of the way the power structure and the oligarchy has worked. And so I think that they're the same discussion in a lot of ways, and to try to tear them apart, it's important to tear them apart into separate ideas when we're talking about the separate ideas, I guess. But we also have to understand that they map onto each other in a pretty clear and easy to understand way if we just look at a few charts and graphs.
I have to interject because I have to go. I didn't realize this was going to be so fabulous and go on for so long. So I just want to thank you all so much. This was really invigorating, and I appreciate your listening to my whole talk. And I'm glad you like the visuals. And I can hardly wait to come back and have something. I'm working on a new book, so when I'm done, I'll see if I can come back and tell you about that one. So thank you all again very much.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, great. Thank you.
I don't know if we've ever stayed this long before.
Well, this has been pretty meaty stuff. So, yeah. All right. Thanks again. Bye-bye.